Welcome everyone. Good afternoon. I'm David Chaplin and it's my pleasure to act as MC for this, the first ever webinar presented by Monash Business Awards. I'm a committee member of the MBA and have worked within the city of Monash for almost 30 years in my role as a sales executive for Eastern Press. As you can no doubt see, I am sitting in my dining room at home in Aspendale. Like many of you out there, I am still working from home while we all work our way through the fallout from this terrible virus. However, for the occasion, I've made a big effort. I have put on a shirt and a jacket for the first time in months. I've even had a shave and a haircut. Although what you can't see is that I am also wearing my kilt, as I always do around the house. This webinar has been made possible by the wonderful support of all our sponsors. The City of Monash. Hi to Paula Brennan, and thanks for all your assistance over the years. To Brighter, which is an initiative of EPIA, the Australian Petroleum Production and Exploratory Association. To CORE, Steve and Tom Putris. Hi guys, big supporters of the MBA. To Sharp Pittman Legal. Hello to, I beg your pardon, Mitchell Zadow. Hi Mitchell, and thank you. The Huntingdale Golf Club. Hi to Kate Knight. Contact Kate for all of your function needs. If I just move this, Waverley BMW, of course. Thanks to Matt Heed, who, if you contact Matt, he will give you a great deal on a lovely new Beamer. The Ross Group, hi to Ash Ross for all your accounting, tax and bookkeeping needs. To Big Fish Recruitment, hi to Nikki Braybrook, the principal at Big Fish, who is also our chairperson at the MBA. And finally, our gold sponsor, Westpac, and hi to Julian Sakowski, and thank you very much for all your support. So, just quickly, we'll get on to some housekeeping if I could. We do welcome any questions that you may have. Please send them through at any time throughout this webinar. You will see on the right-hand side of your screen a question function that will allow you to send through any questions to our guest presenter this afternoon, who is Stephen Anthony. Stephen has told me that he's not going to sugarcoat things. He promises to tell us like it is, which sounds ominous, but it should be really interesting. So I'm looking forward to that. Now, as you can see on screen, we have our three nominees for this afternoon. First of all, we have Nikki Rosu from Exaptech. Hi, Nikki, how are you? I think you might be muted, but we can see you anyway. Then we have in the middle there, we can see Suresh Hada. Suresh is from, here we go. Oh, sorry, Robust Consulting Engineers. Sorry, Suresh, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Oh, good, we can hear Suresh. And finally, Judy O'Connor from Accessibility Australia. Good afternoon, Judy.
Hi.
Hi. So, our first nominee this afternoon to present their 2-minute elevator pitch. So at this point, I would normally ask for a 2-minute elevator pitch, but as we know right now, we can only fit 2 people into an elevator. So I'm not going to do that. I am instead going to ask you to give us your 2-minute presentation and please let us know all about your company, Exaptech. Thanks, Nikki.
Hi, Dave, and thank you, and hello to our audience out there. My name is Nikki Rosu. I'm the CEO and founder of Exaptech. It's a robotics company based at the Eastern Innovation Centre in Mulgrave. Exaptech specialises in telepresence, social and educational robotics that we sell across New Zealand and Australia. We've been trading for 5 years now, and in 2020 we were nominated as one of the Westpac 2 Businesses of 200 winners, so a great accolade for us. So what does a telepresence robot look like and what does it do? Imagine yourself in your office or at home at the moment and you need to connect with someone at your office. You dial in via the internet, and the little robot that's about 5 foot high is in its charging dock in the office, and you dial in and you navigate your way around your office, and you can chat to your colleague. It's got a tablet on the top connected to a pole, and it's normally on a wheel base. So if you can extend your imagination to that, that's what a telepresence robot looks like. We have just declared the exclusive distributorship of the QT robot, and this is a little robot that specializes with children with autism in Australia. We do professional development with teachers, teaching them the basics of coding as well. And being part of the Monash precinct, we do a lot of collaboration with Monash University. Last year we collaborated with the legal department and had a technology showcase at their open day. We've had a group of MBA students that have used Exaptech as a showcase in their studies, and I frequently get invited to be a speaker at Monash, thus bridging the industry and academia gap that that needs to be sort of crossed over. And I host the Melbourne Robotics Show, a meetup group at the EIBC as well. And I've also just launched a podcast, Let's Talk Robotics. So thank you very much for letting me introduce Exaptech.
Thanks very much, Nikki. That was really interesting. What I take out of that is I think I want one of your little robots. So I could send a robot into my office and it would do my job for me. I could sit on the beach. That sounds, we'll need to have a chat afterwards. That sounds great. But thanks very much. What I neglected to say prior to your talk was that Exaptech were presenting in the innovation and technology category. So I apologize for that. Thank you very much, Nikki. We'll talk to you again in a few moments.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our second nominee this afternoon, and there she is, nominating in the health and science category, is Judy O'Connor from Accessibility Australia. Hey, Judy, please go ahead and give us your presentation.
Well, thanks, Dave. Hi, everyone. My name's Judy O'Connor, and together with Maxine Parker, we are the co-founders and directors of Accessibility Australia. I'm the parent to 2 boys, one with a severe disability. AAA was founded on a passion to create a more inclusive community for my son and families like mine, to create a better world for people with disability to live and enjoy life with equity, independence, dignity and respect. We are the founders and developers of Access Keys. Access Keys are customised accessibility guides that decrease barriers, increase enablers and provide accurate and convenient information about accessing venues and events. The work our business undertakes proudly delivers a gift of calm, confidence and independence to people living with disability and their families. We serve 2 audiences, our clients, which include local government, tourism operators, sporting and recreational bodies, and our true audience, people with disability. In our first 4 years of business, we have enjoyed a high rate of growth. The AAA team has grown from 2 co-founders to a solid team of 7 professionals. Sales have increased by 70%, and we now proudly showcase over 60 Access Keys on our website. As well as this, we are soon to release a beta version of our all-new AAA app. Our app is both friendly and includes interactive sensory guides. Our business is based in Eastern Innovation Business Centre in Mulgrave. Moving to EIBC was one of the best decisions we've ever made as a business. We're incredibly supported by Danielle Story and her team. We also currently collaborate with 4 other businesses on site. We also regularly connect with City of Monash Metro Access Officer Barb Wallace, and will be presenting at their next Disability Advisory Committee. We look forward to developing an access key for EIBC and supporting the City of Monash with increased access and inclusion. Thank you.
And thank you, Judy. I think the warmth and the empathy that you obviously have shows through in your voice, and I think that must carry on to your business and must be a big part of your success. So congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our final nominee to speak this afternoon, and there he is. He's a very handsome man. It's Suresh Hada. Suresh is from Robust Consulting Engineers, and they are nominated in the Transport, Trade and Construction nomination category. Hi, Suresh. Hi again.
Hello.
Hey, please tell us all about Robust.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Suresh Hada, founder and director of Robust Consulting Engineers. I chose the name as Robust to reflect the nature of civil and structural engineering that we provide. My country of birth is Nepal. I am fellow chartered professional engineer and accredited certifier for civil and structural engineering in all states of Australia. Essentially, our company specializes in structural design within building and construction, namely commercial solar, signage, smelter, breeze, and also the structures that require earthquake and blast resistance. Our current major business areas are signage and solar, in which we have established our engineering identity throughout Australia by completing 400 projects last year only, and more than 800 projects since the company's establishment in 2017. City of Monash has recently aimed to have a net zero carbon emission by 2025. We believe that our specialization of analysis and assessment of structural solar installation greatly contribute to achieve this goal. So far, we have completed approximately 600 solar projects, and the largest of which is one in La Trobe University, which we completed 2.11 megawatt size that consists of approximately 6,000 solar panels on the roof. Furthermore, we have done a big smelter design and associated structures in Indonesia. This is a memorable achievement to be involved in an international project of such magnitude. The project cost was about $100 million, over $100 million. This project enabled us to be a part of international collaboration of multinational experts. Thus, Robust has been successful in expanding this business within a very short period of time due to the quality of service it provides. Having our business in Monash has been strategically advantageous to Robust, as Monash itself is centrally located in the eastern part of Melbourne, and it has been developing as a multicultural community hub, having excellent infrastructure. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Suresh. It sounds like you've done an incredible job taking a company that was only started 3 years ago, and some of the projects and some of the numbers that you're talking about show an immense growth in a short time. So congratulations on that, and congratulations on your nomination this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Dave.
Now, if I could ask all of our nominees to rejoin us. Somewhere in the background, someone's pressing some buttons, and here we go. We've got all of our nominees. So, Nikki, if I could quickly ask you a quick question. How has COVID-19 accelerated the use of robots in Australia?
Really very rapidly. We've seen a great increase in the use of telepresence robots, and I'll give you just a quick case study that hospitals are now using it. So with doctors with personal protective equipment, and you know that they could hardly see their patients with all the stuff that they were working. So hospitals in Brisbane and Adelaide have actually invested in one of my robots called the Temi. It's got self-navigation, so the doctor doesn't actually have to touch it in any way. It drives to the patients, and the doctors can talk to them and consult with them. So there's been a rapid increase. I've sold all my stock, which has been great, and I'm waiting for my next order. So if you're interested, please do pre-order. And it's really highlighted the use of robotics across Australia and the world in terms of how beneficial and helpful these robots can be.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us. That's fantastic. Thanks a lot again, Nikki. Judy, if I could ask you, as the founder of a startup fairly recently, what would be your #1 recommendation for any new business startup?
I would recommend don't do it on your own. Find a partner, a good business partner that shares the same goals and core business values. They also have to have a really good sense of humour if you want to work with me as well. And I would, if you can, find someone that has the opposite strengths to you and the opposite weaknesses, and that's really worked well for Maxine and I, and it's probably our business has benefited because of that, for sure.
Good advice. Thanks very much. Thanks again, Judy. And finally, to you, Suresh, why should an organisation choose your service above those of your competitors?
Thank you, Dave. We actually work very efficiently, and our price, our fee, engineering fee, is very competitive compared to other existing competitors. We actually act very quickly in any questions, or for example, if there is a project coming and we have to quote it, we take only 24 hours. Within 24 hours, we deliver the quote, and after the purchase order received, we deliver the project within 3 days. And to provide an engineering project delivering within 3 days is quite tight. So we have a number of people, total 9 people working with us. Of course, we have reduced few numbers because of this COVID at the moment. But yes, our instant response to any questions, or we even carry our survey equipment. Normally, engineers, if there is a project of roof assessment for the solar installation, then the survey is a part. And then you will actually call surveyors to go there. But we ourselves, being engineer, we go with the survey equipments, do the survey, and then we use the technology to transfer from the survey area to our office. We transfer through WhatsApp, and all information are going, and instantly the work is going on in the office. So that's how we do. And a lot of development work when there is a quiet place time like this, we do a lot of development work and automate our engineering solving solutions during the quiet time, so that we make more efficient and deliver the project in a competitive manner. That's why the clients are selecting us, and then within short time we have established our business.
Thank you very much for filling us in. It sounds as though you've got all bases covered there within your organisation, and good team built around you, which is what everyone needs. So a big thank you once again to our 3 nominees, to Nikki, to Judy, and to Suresh. We wish you every success with your nomination. And at this point, we would normally present you with your nomination certificates. But of course, today, being on a virtual meeting, this is not possible. But we will get them to you as we visit your sites, which is as part of the nominee process. So once again, to our 3 nominees, to Nikki, Judy, and Suresh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck. Okay, so nominations and nominees are such an important part of our Monash Business Awards programme, and we're always looking for new businesses in our municipality that are the top of the field to nominate. The benefits are endless and provide brilliant recognition amongst your peers. If you are a business, or you know of any business worthy of nomination, please be sure to go to our website, which you can see below, monashbusinessawards.com.au, to find out how it's done. It's a very simple process. And to our audience out there, if you have any questions for our nominees who you've just heard from, or would like to get in touch with them, please contact Lisa at Executive Director at monashbusinessawards.com.au, and she will put you in touch. And so Now on to our guest presenter for this afternoon. As you can all see, we've been joined by Stephen Anthony. Good afternoon, Stephen.
Hi, David. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. So, before Stephen gives us a talk, I will give you a brief introduction, let you know a little bit more about Stephen and who he is and what exactly his experience is. Stephen Anthony, our guest presenter, we're certainly going to look forward to hearing your thoughts and comments regarding the outlook of the global economy, especially in the wake of COVID-19. And I'm not reading this, that was very natural. For those of you who have not read up on his bio, it's pretty impressive. Stephen is ISA's chief economist. He is a highly experienced macroeconomist and a fiscal policy specialist with almost 30 years of experience. And we had a laugh the other day. Stephen said it's not 20 years, it's almost 30 years. And we all realized we're getting old very quickly. Prior to his current role, he was the Director of Budget and Forecasting at the economic modelling firm, Macroeconomics. He has worked as a Senior Policy Officer at both the Federal Treasury and the Department of Finance in Canberra, in fiscal policy and budget analysis. Earlier in his career, he worked briefly for the International Monetary Fund, the Heritage Foundation, and Institute for International Economics, whilst undertaking studies in Washington, DC. Stephen is also a prominent economic forecaster. He contributes to the Reserve Bank of Australia's quarterly survey of market economists. And as a quick reminder, if anyone has any questions for Stephen, please feel free to send them through on the question panel on your webinar screen. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Anthony.
Thanks so much, David. And thanks to Monash Business Awards for this opportunity, and especially to Lisa Christensen, the Executive Director at Monash Business Awards. I really appreciate you giving me this chance to talk today to your wonderful audience and to talk about a very serious topic, which is where the Australian economy is mid-year 2020 in the face of the pandemic crisis. So I've got a little presentation that we'd like to share with you. I'll just bring that up. So for those who would like the potted summary of what we're going to talk about today, firstly, I'm going to just give you an update on the state of play of the Australian economy and financial markets, mid 2020 in the face of this pandemic crisis. And the good news is, we've faced a very short, sharp shock here in Australia, and put the economy in the deep freeze. And it seems like things are working well. It seems like we're steadily getting back to normal now after two or three tough months, acknowledging that we've just had the unemployment rate announced at 7.1%, a 19-year high. So it's tough times for many people, and it's certainly impacted on everyone. But the good news is things seem to be going reasonably well in terms of moving out of this trough. But more fundamentally, I think Australia and the global economy is looking at a period of significant uncertainty. And we'd like to look at some of the drivers of why that is, why it is that growth rates may be low in coming years, and why financial market uncertainty may be the norm for some time to come, and potentially low returns as well. So without further ado, I'll dispense with the summary and get into the presentation. Just a reminder that I'm not providing financial advice here, and these opinions that I'm expressing to you are those of mine and not Industry Super Australia itself. So just bear that in mind. I think we've covered off. We see on the screen the relationship between the United States and China in better days. So the COVID shock, what has occurred here? So what we've observed is a synchronized global recession take place, and unlike other shocks, or at least recessions that have been experienced in the last half a century, this shock is what you would describe as a real economy shock. So it wasn't caused by some sort of boom bust credit cycle, or by monetary policy or fiscal policy being too easy and then being too light. It has occurred because of essentially a health crisis, which forced governments to shut down various sectors of their economy, which then disrupted global supply chains, which then fed through to the sort of spending loop and crimped spending in domestic economies, which then obviously impacted financial markets, so much so that we saw big drawdowns in the United States and other major equity markets, which will have liquidity and solvency consequences in coming months, and potentially some of the longest lasting effects of this corona pandemic may be the solvency issues being unwound in coming years.
Can you hear me? Your screen is frozen. That's better, thank you.
Is that better?
Yes, that's now better. That's working now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. So how profound has this shock been? Well, right now it seems that global GDP growth has been reduced by more than 10% in the second quarter of 2020. Probably around 13% in total. Some of the economies that have been most impacted have seen significantly worse hits than that. So, for example, Italy and the United Kingdom, France and India have had significant shocks in excess of 20% of GDP in the second quarter of 2020. That is profound. Australia, on the other hand, has been, relatively unscathed through the crisis compared to others, and largely that's because of very, very proactive, responsive fiscal policy management by the Morrison government, and also preemptive moves by the Reserve Bank and other agencies of the Commonwealth. So, to a large extent, the impacts in Australia have been relatively modest, and we at ISA are forecasting that output will fall in the second quarter by around 4%, and that there will be a permanent loss to output. If you think about where we would have been relative to the shock not occurring, there will be a loss of output of around 5% in coming quarters. But essentially that after the next 2 or 3 quarters, we'll get back to something like a normal growth path, so that by the latter half of 2021, we hope that normalcy will resume, at least for the Australian economy. That's the real economy, returning to growth rates that perhaps might have been considered in the past somewhat soft. but still respectable. So the next, the period from 2021 through to sort of 21, 22, we'll see us return to something like the pre-outbreak growth rate, and of course that is very good news. Obviously, significant risks abound around this forecast, especially around international travel, tourism, the arrival of students next year, whether we must maintain the lockdown across state borders. And of course, these flow through to largely to big impacts for small businesses and those that service entertainment, retail trade, in traditional bricks and mortar. So, there are significant risks around those forecasts, but at the moment, that's pretty good news compared to where we could have been if we'd handled this less adeptly. In a budgetary sense, we are in dire straits. Right now, the federal budget deficit looks to be something around $80 billion. And we were expecting a small surplus this year. So, that has moved very quickly, essentially 4% of GDP deficit in the space of a few months. Really unparalleled speed in terms of fiscal deterioration. And we're expecting a similarly sized deficit, maybe a little larger next financial year, but hopefully those deficits will be enough to buy the stimulus we need to relaunch the economy. ISA are predicting a peak unemployment rate close to 9%, presumably by the middle of this year, and we hope that the unemployment rate then begins to fall thereafter. That's some of the sort of worst news of this presentation. Interestingly, global central banks in the G4, the sort of major economies excluding China, have been incredibly proactive through this period. Indeed, their expansion of liquidity has been unparalleled. So right now, we are seeing the continuation of a trend that is at least a decade long, where central banks are expanding their balance sheets at an incredibly rapid clip. Now, the risk to this strategy, of course, is that it feeds further through to asset prices, as we are seeing now in equity markets and debt markets around the world. There has been an incredible uptick on Wall Street, around 40% since the sort of the trough in March, and even the Australian market is up 30%. According to Stanley Druckenmiller, the famous investor, Wall Street is now telling us that COVID never happened, which is very interesting. What it looks like now is that if you look across the equities universe, especially in the United States, virtually no one is down, even companies that are clearly illiquid, insolvent, such as Hertz and Whitney Petroleum and JCPenney. What that means is there's a huge irrationality in markets at the moment, and you can see that in terms of the forward PEs for companies. They're trading at levels that are essentially at all-time highs, especially tech stocks such as Amazon, Apple, and Netflix. And that is very worrying, because that means that liquidity is flowing through, propping up asset markets. And of course, that means that central banks are driving financial returns. Central banks are the sort of only game in town, and that means there's a big wedge between the real economy and asset prices. And that's a theme that we'll explore over the next few minutes. So historically, in the United States and in Australia, equities and housing have earned for 100 years something around 8 to 9% every year on average. And bonds have earned about half that, and measured prices have been less than, well, let's say around 3%. Now, you know, I make this point because perhaps we are entering a new normal, at least for some time, because those rates of return look very respectable. But perhaps those rates of return aren't likely to continue in the near term. So if you think about the way financial markets and the economy interact, growth rates in the real economy over the longer term essentially drive the return to assets. And you can see that in this chart. For the period 1925 through to 2019, the return on the stock market has essentially equaled the return in terms of nominal GDP growth in the United States economy. But right now there does seem to be a wedge in financial markets that's been driven by very expansionary monetary policy. And so that means that in a very low growth environment, it is likely that asset returns, which have been incredibly high, may turn negative for some period to come. And perhaps that's the adjustment that the COVID crisis has begun to flush out. So if you think about,
just listen. Hey?
What's likely to occur in terms of asset returns over the next 7 years, if you think of mean reversion as the norm, we would think that investors will be lucky to earn zero returns over the next decade. And when you think about that, that's a very, very bold claim, or very bold, very depressing statement. Imagine that was true, for example, on your superannuation balance, that you earned a zero return. But that's the conclusion that our analysis sort of leads us to. But perhaps what our analytics are saying there is that there is a big adjustment in the offing, that we may hit that in one period, so for example 1 year. And you know, on that sort of rather a pessimistic note, we'd like to now talk you through some of the drivers of these sort of low growth rates and potentially low returns that we're seeing in the global economy today. And to sort of talk you through that story, we see the global economy as being driven by 4 long-term cycles. And those cycles relate to demography, productivity, policy, that's sort of macro policy, and politics. So, you know, if you think about where the global economy is today, a lot of it is driven by the population bulge that came about after World War II, the so-called, you know, baby boomers. When the baby boomers hit the workforce in the 1970s, they started saving, and they drove up the level of wealth in the economy relative to the size of the economy to levels that it had never been before. And that drove down asset returns, you know. And I guess eventually that was that coincided with the entry of China into the WTO, which once again increased the global pool of saving to a very significant level, by a very significant amount, which once again drove down returns to assets and reduced incentives for new capital investment in the developed economies. And then to keep the financial machine rolling, especially in the United States, we saw governments and especially central banks resort to policies that essentially pumped prime their economies using debt, and of course, while that may drive up average returns, it doesn't lead to a better allocation of capital to raise marginal returns in the economy. It doesn't lead to a more efficient allocation of resources. It just leads to greater riskiness in the future. So we've been scaling the debt mountains through time, and now we've seen central banks return to the well, as we've seen in the previous few slides. Global liquidity being entered into the markets now is unprecedented. So all of this has led to a squeeze, what Larry Summers calls secular stagnation. And as we've seen just a few slides ago, low economic returns mean probably low asset market returns once the effervescence from the stimulus of monetary policy is exhausted. So we've seen a sort of synchronous global slowdown, and that then feeds to inequality and the rise of populism, based on the fact that essentially governments have focused on investor-friendly policies, or policies that are biased towards existing asset holders. And there's a lot of resentment, especially amongst workers in sort of middle class occupations in the industrialized world relative to the developing world. That's sort of the Trump revolt that we've observed in the US, and to some extent here, especially in New South Wales and Queensland. So the claim that I make there, that this all begins with demography. Well, you can see that in terms of the chart that we have on the screen, which sort of shows you where the population bubble occurred around the sort of 1970s, 1980s, and that was then followed by a sort of a wealth bubble as these people began to save, which then led to a reduction in the marginal return on capital, which lowers growth rates. Sorry, I'll just go back to this slide, which then saw, through inappropriate policy responses, especially the reduction of interest rates to sort of near zero levels from about 2007, 2008 onwards, a profound reduction in gross fixed investment in the developed economies. And that, more than anything, has driven down productivity in the OECD and therefore growth rates. At the same time, perhaps authorities took their eyes off the ball when it came to regulating large corporate entities that had oligopoly or monopoly positions in various markets. So if you think about all your sort of tech players in various industries, these are some of the largest firms in the world now. And if you look at their productivity relative to firms that were once in that sort of top 20 or top 4 space in the United States, their productivity is far lower, yet they're incredibly profitable, which suggests that they're earning economic rents rather than driving benefits for consumers. So this is another break on measured growth rates around the OECD, and certainly here in Australia. And here's some stock market information about those so-called FANG stocks, and our equivalent here in Australia, the WAX, which suggests their prices are completely and utterly out of kilter with their earnings potential, which says that either there's an asset price bubble there, or they will achieve incredible rates of earnings in the future. I tend to think that there's an asset price bubble in play that will presumably unwind in coming months. So we've seen measured productivity in the last decade come right off in the United States and in Australia and all around the world. And essentially, as we've said, we think that's driven by low capital spending and by governments kicking the can down the road, not reforming, not doing the sort of hard structural reforms that drive future growth prospects, and essentially subsidising what we call zombie companies that who have earnings that are essentially less than their interest bills. And now the global economy is literally awash with debt. So if you look at global debt, it is now 3 times the level it was before the GFC. And a lot of that is held by those corporations, those so-called zombie companies with debt structures that essentially are junk status. And now we see that the Federal Reserve Bank is allowing the issuance of repo facility against that junk debt, which is once again driving up asset prices, driving up equities. And so, this sort of situation seems completely untenable in terms of good, sound macroeconomic policy. Now, many would argue that the Australian government, even with the federal budget deficits that we've alluded to earlier, is a little immune from these risks, because essentially the level of indebtedness in the Australian economy is so low. But of course, whilst our government debt is very low, if you look at the light blue line here, our household debt is world leading as a share of GDP. And because of that, if you think about the combination of debt here in Australia, it is really a very significant risk for ourselves going forward, especially if you think about where that debt resides. It is not sort of invested widely. It's invested in residential housing, largely in property prices that have been driven up in Sydney and Melbourne. And so much of that debt is held by Australian banks, and it is not really diversified at all. This chart shows you how much the US private businesses are funded by debt relative to equity compared to earlier periods. So therefore, we really are in a situation where we are riding a debt pyramid, the debt mountains, and the level of US non-financial corporate debt is just rising through time. And as we've said earlier, a third to a half of that is junk debt. So really, it's incredibly risky. It's really financial dynamite for the global financial markets. So my claim is that global asset prices have been driven by liquidity. And if you look at this chart here, this data on the screen suggests that that is very clearly true, and that the next thing will happen is that we'll see another uptick in financial assets. I guess what we're seeing now now in the United States and here in Australia, because global asset expansion, global liquidity expansion has been so rapid. And that's what you would predict out of this chart. So continued asset price inflation, but eventually some sort of major correction. So is this debt a worry going forward? Well, I would argue it really is. People would say that as long as your level of nominal GDP in your economy stays ahead of 10-year debt levels, Commonwealth debt levels, sovereign bond yields, as long as your nominal GDP is higher, you'll be able to service your debt. And they point to the very low level of very low cost of borrowing long-term debt. But I just make the point now that nominal GDP is falling rapidly. Australia is exposed to a significant iron ore price crunch that seems to be looming over the next 12 months. as Brazil comes back online in terms of iron ore production. And therefore, nominal GDP could well fall for some time below 10-year bond yields, and therefore the level of debt in this country may become unsustainable. The other risk, of course, with rising debt levels is just the fact that the cost of servicing that debt benefits those people who own existing assets. And as the French economist Piketty argues, the more that the return on those assets exceeds that nominal growth rate in the economy, the more asset holders, the holders of existing wealth, are benefited relative to the working class, you know, to people who are out there who are trying to make their way in the world. And therefore, you know, that's why these issues of equity are so red hot, especially in the last decade, and especially after the GFC. And I guess that's why governments have done their best to really quarantine the working class during the current pandemic. We note that if you really want to get hold of just how far global macroeconomic balances have become unstable, measure economies and their currencies relative to the price of gold. When you do that, you find that there's been a steady erosion in the value of currencies. And essentially what economies have been undertaking is competitive devaluations, especially starting with the United States and then fanning out. And so what that means is that slowly, the dollars that we all hold have become less valuable in terms of purchasing power. And, you know, potentially this helps to explain, you know, one thing that's really been a curiosity for economists is why it is that we haven't seen more inflation in our economies. Well, what we have seen is lots of asset price inflation, but not mainstream inflation through measured consumer prices. But really, through exchange rates and through asset prices, the price pressures that would otherwise have been felt through consumer prices have been absorbed this way. But that doesn't necessarily mean we won't see a return to high Main Street prices in the very near future as these global debt levels pick up even further. So what do we do about all this? It seems at the moment that demography, policy, productivity and politics are taking us in the wrong direction. Well, I guess our answer to that is that we need really robust policy settings that focus on productivity and bringing people together to counteract the impacts of demography and other factors that are driving down measured growth rates and driving down returns on financial assets. We can have a fast growth and a high returning future, but we have to make really solid financial market and good policy decisions to support growth prospects over the next decade. So what we see as being necessary is really principled global coordination, especially through fiscal policy and through monetary policy, much better coordination of policy. We think that the way forward for many economies is robust fiscal policy, good public investment programs, and structural reform programs that deal with the underlying depressing drivers of economic output. We also think that the beneficiaries of these programs really need to compensate those at maybe at the bottom of the economic pyramid to make this possible, to make it fair. So that's really all I have to say. I wonder now if it isn't time to take some questions from you. I very much thank you all for your attention and this opportunity to share my thoughts on the international situation today.
Stephen, thank you very much for giving us all of that information this afternoon. You told me you weren't going to sugarcoat things, and you haven't disappointed. I jotted down some notes as you were talking, and the one that jumped out at me was the level of household debt within Australia and how sobering that is. And a question's come through from Hal Posson. Hi, Hal, and thanks for your question. So I'll read it from screen. Is it true that Australian banks' exposure to residential property is the highest in the developed world? Reportedly, this is the IMF's view.
Well, I think it's absolutely true. And I think if we have a think about that, we really see that one great failing of financial market deregulation from the early 1980s onwards. If you think about what the role of our banks was and why we always allowed them to perhaps be more concentrated, to have that oligopoly position in the Australian economy, was they had a public utility role in terms of investing. We wanted them to loan money to small businesses and to medium-sized businesses especially, and of course to support owner-occupiers in buying homes. But really, more and more, for reasons of profitability, but also for reasons of risk weightings after the GFC, the Australian banks tilted towards a business that essentially focused on investor lending in housing. So households that already had one property buying another rental property and then another and another, and using a self-managed super fund and limited recourse borrowing to finance that. And so really, the Reserve Bank took its eye off the ball there and, has something to answer for in terms of making, allowing a situation where small business couldn't borrow for anything like a reasonable risk-adjusted rate, within 500 basis points of reasonable, based on the RBA's own analysis. And yet, mum and dad investors could leverage themselves to the hilt and price everybody else out of the property market. So thanks for Hal's question.
And we are rapidly running out of time, so I'm going to make this the last question. It comes from Bill Herditch. And first of all, Bill says, great presentation, Stephen. You mentioned iron ore value reductions affecting GDP growth. What about the huge likely corrections in natural gas prices globally?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting question. A lot of it's already fed through, and one of the curiosities of the Australian economy's exposure to that position is that we have a lot of fixed price agreements with various Asian economies who receive our natural gas, and because of that, we have long-term prices already locked away. So it's almost a situation, no matter how low the price falls, that situation can't get much worse for Australia. Many people have commented that the Japanese have been receiving our LNG at a lower price than the global price because of these fixed contracts. But now, as the global price falls, that sort of subsidy that we see has been reduced, at least somewhat. So in some ways, that's less of a problem for Australia, more of a problem for others.
Okay, and I said that was going to be the last question, but I'm going to ask you one more because it's come through from Hugh O'Donnell, and it's one that particularly interests me. What are your thoughts on the implications for Australia of a Trump re-election or a Biden win, particularly relating to US-China trade?
Well, so putting the politics of it aside, and some of the more unfortunate aspects of the last few years in terms of social cohesion and messaging coming from, I guess, the presidency. The many aspects of US foreign policy over the last 4 years have been incredibly far-sighted and have been overwhelmingly positive for the long-term security and peaceful development of this region. And so, to the extent that whoever is elected can continue to insist on property rights, rule of law, and security for all countries and economies in this region, that has to be a good thing. That has to be a very good thing. It's this idea of trade should benefit all, and it should not occur on terms that are essentially prejudicial to some economies. And at times, Australia has been disadvantaged by our preparedness to trade on any terms.
Okay, Stephen, I said that was going to be the last question. I will hold you to that. So thanks very much once again for your time this afternoon. And to everyone
thank you so much for the opportunity, Dave.
Thanks, Stephen. That was really great. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And thank you to our 3 nominees who all presented their businesses this afternoon. We had Nikki Russo from Exaptech. We had Judy O'Connor from Accessibility Australia and Suresh Hada from Robust Consulting Engineers. So, to our audience, as part of this presentation, there are some handouts available which have some useful information. A nominee form should you want to nominate yourselves or a business that you know within the city of Monash, and some information. In the middle there, you can see information on the Monash Business Awards. And finally, on the right, you can see some exclusive insights from Stephen Anthony. Thank you, Stephen, for providing those to us. All of those can be downloaded through the handout section of the control panel on the right-hand side. On behalf of the MBA, we're always looking at new ideas and ways in which to run events. This is our first ever webinar. You guys out there, our members and our audience, may have other ideas that could help us, or perhaps even new, fresh ideas on how we could change things up. And please submit them to us. We'd love to hear from you. So, due to COVID-19 and all the disruptions that has caused, we're unable to hold our gala dinner this year, which would normally happen in July. We've had to postpone it, and we're going to put it back for 12 months, unfortunately, until next July, where we will have a super big, extra large, extra fancy gala dinner when combining years 2020 and 21 together. So please stay with us for more information on that as it comes to hand. Our next lunch will be in September. We still don't know whether that might be virtual or whether it will be a real lunch, hopefully at the Huntingdale Golf Club, where we can all meet each other and network. Our guest speaker that day will be, as you can see on screen, Peter Bellion. Peter is not only the captain of Huntingdale Golf Club, he's a former crash scene investigator, and he specialises in mental health, which all ties in with Are You OK month, which is September, and mental health in particular for men, but also for, well, for everyone, and how we can look after ourselves. So, having said all of that, on behalf of the MBA committee, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. We hope you found it insightful. We really appreciate it, and have a great afternoon. Thank you.